Gentlemen, welcome back. Today we're going to unpack a relationship dynamic that can break even solid, disciplined men. The kind who handle pressure at work, keep their word, show up for family, and still find themselves confused and worn down at home. This is the situation that starts like a movie. Effortless chemistry, intense connection, the feeling that you've finally met someone who sees you. And then, months later, it can feel like you're living inside a psychological maze where you're constantly apologizing, constantly fixing, constantly trying to prove you're a good man. Yet the more you give, the worse it gets. If you've been there, you know the sensation. You're not fighting one argument, you're fighting a pattern, a cycle, a script. And the scariest part is how reasonable it looks from the outside. Your friends might say, just communicate. Your family might say, be patient. You might tell yourself, if I love her well enough, this will stabilize. But what if this isn't primarily about communication skill? What if you walked into an old wound that existed long before you arrived, and you've been cast into a role you never auditioned for? That's what we're talking about today. The relationship pattern, often driven by an unprocessed father wound, an unresolved rupture in a woman's early bond with the primary male figure in her life. Not in a trendy, internet insult way, in a real psychological way, where early experiences wire expectations into the nervous system. This is not a women are bad video. Let's be clear. This is about trauma patterns, attachment, emotional regulation, and what happens when pain is carried into adulthood without being faced. There are women who do the work and become incredible partners. There are men who have similar wounds and can behave in destructive ways too. But today, we're focusing on the dynamic many men encounter. You're stable, you're steady, you're trying to build something real, and your presence seems to trigger chaos rather than calm. If you're living this right now, the first thing you need is not another trick. It's clarity, because confusion is how you get trapped. So let's slow down and break it apart, piece by piece, until you can see what you're actually dealing with and what you need to do to protect your sanity, your dignity, and your future. The beginning. Intensity that feels like destiny. It often starts with heat. You meet her and it doesn't feel like normal attraction. It feels like gravity, like a pull you can't explain. She's expressive, present, locked in. She looks at you like you're the one man on earth who finally understands her. She's open fast, too fast sometimes. She shares deep pain early. She tells you things most people don't reveal until months in. You feel chosen, needed, trusted, and for a good man, especially a man with standards that feels meaningful. You're not just chasing a body or an ego boost. You're thinking, this is real. She's letting me in. She's not playing games. You step up, you protect, you listen, you show consistency. You become the man you already believe a man should be. And for a while, it's incredible. But then time passes, 3 months, 6 months, and something shifts. The air gets heavy. The warmth turns into suspicion. Compliments turn into critiques. Your kindness becomes not enough. Your calm becomes you don't care. Your silence becomes you're punishing me. Your effort becomes you're just doing that to look good. Small misunderstandings become full-blown explosions. Quiet evenings become landmines. You start measuring every word. You start editing yourself. You start predicting moods like a weather system. And eventually, you ask the question that drives men insane. What did I do wrong? What did I break? Why does it get worse the more I try? Here's the truth a lot of men need to hear, even if it feels brutal. You may not have broken anything. You may have walked into a system that was already programmed for disaster. Father wound, what it is and why it matters. Father wound isn't a poetic phrase. It's shorthand for an emotional imprint created when a girl's early relationship with her father, or primary male caregiver, teaches her that love is unsafe, inconsistent, conditional, or disappearing. Fathers shape a girl's early blueprint for men, whether he intends to or not. He becomes the first reference point for what masculinity feels like close up, how men handle stress, how men respond to emotion, whether men protect or dismiss, whether men stay or leave. When that imprint is healthy, it creates a baseline belief. Men can be safe, love can be steady, I can relax. When that imprint is damaged, something else forms. A nervous system level expectation that closeness will eventually hurt. This wound can come in different forms. A father who was physically present but emotionally absent, work obsessed, cold, distracted, rarely affectionate unless performance was perfect. A father who was unpredictable, affectionate one day, explosive the next, praise followed by criticism, warmth followed by withdrawal. A father who was unsafe, addiction, aggression, humiliating language, emotional volatility. A father who left, abandonment, divorce without emotional support, or simply disappearing. A father who made love conditional. I'm proud of you only when you achieve. I notice you only when you behave. I approve only when you fit the role. In any of these environments, a child adapts, not with logic, with survival. She learns lessons she might never say out loud, but her body believes them. Love can vanish. Calm never lasts. I have to earn attention. If I relax, I'll get blindsided. If I show need, I'll be rejected. Men don't stay. Men say they care, then they hurt you. And here's the part men often miss. These aren't just thoughts. They become automatic responses patterns in the nervous system. That means, even if she sincerely wants a loyal husband, a family, stability or deeper wiring may interpret stability as danger. She can consciously want peace and unconsciously create war. That's not because she's evil. It's because trauma often turns the mind into a security system that mistakes love for a threat. And when you show up steady, available, committed, you don't just feel like a boyfriend. You trigger the old file. You activate the old alarm. Why your reliability can make things worse. Let's talk about the paradox that confuses good men. You think if she grew up with an unreliable man, she should appreciate a reliable one. That's logical. That's masculine thinking, cause and effect, problem and solution. But the psyche doesn't run on logic. It runs on familiarity. Human beings don't always choose what's healthiest. They often choose what's recognizable because the nervous system knows how to operate there. Even if it hurts, if a woman's early emotional environment was chaos, her nervous system learned that chaos is normal. It learned to function in adrenaline. It learned to equate intensity with connection. So when you bring calm, consistency, normalcy, she doesn't always feel relief. She may feel suspicious because calm to her body doesn't read as safety. It reads as the quiet before the storm. You're giving her peace, but her system is trained to search for the hidden knife. So she watches, she scans, she tests, she waits for the moment you reveal the truth she's expecting, that you're like the others. And when that waiting becomes unbearable, when the anxiety gets too loud, she may do something that seems irrational. She creates the storm herself, because in trauma logic, a controlled disaster is less terrifying than an unpredictable one. If she starts the fight, She's not the victim of the chaos, she's the manager of it. If she provokes the rupture, she doesn't have to sit in the vulnerability of trusting you. This is why some men feel like the relationship becomes unstable, specifically when things are going well. You plan a good weekend, you're close, you're affectionate, things feel aligned, and suddenly she finds a reason to detonate over something small, over a tone, over a facial expression, over a missed text, over a harmless comment. To you, it's petty. To her nervous system, it's a mission. Prove he's not safe before I get hurt. Conflict as emotional regulation. Now we're going deeper. For many people with unresolved wounds, conflict isn't primarily about solving problems. Conflict becomes a tool to manage internal emotion. When intimacy gets close, it can trigger panic, and not because closeness is bad, but because closeness means exposure. And exposure in her history meant pain. So as the relationship becomes more real, her system starts sounding alarms. This is too good. Don't trust it. He'll leave. He'll switch. Something is wrong. That anxiety has to go somewhere. Healthy people regulate anxiety with self-awareness. They breathe, reflect, communicate, ask for reassurance directly, tolerate uncertainty, keep perspective. But if someone didn't develop those tools, their system chooses what it knows. It chooses drama. A fight creates a distance. It resets the emotional intensity. It gives her a burst of adrenaline that feels familiar. It puts you back in the role her system understands. The man I need to manage. And in a twisted way, conflict can feel like connection to someone who equates intensity with love. If her father only paid attention when things were wrong, when she cried, when she performed, when there was a crisis, then her brain learned big emotion equals being seen. So calm love can feel like being invisible. A peaceful evening where you read a book and she scrolls her phone might feel to you like comfort. To her, it can feel like abandonment. Not because you did something wrong, but because her system is searching for the familiar proof that she matters. And sometimes the only proof her wiring recognizes is a reaction, any reaction. That's why men end up exhausted. You're trying to build a stable home. She keeps creating earthquakes to test the foundation. And you start thinking the relationship is about fixing issues, when it's actually about managing her internal storms. The tests: will you leave like he did? Underneath the behavior, there's often one core fear: will you leave me too? But here's the problem: she may not ask it with words. She asks it with pressure. She asks it with provocation. She asks it by becoming difficult right when things are good. She asks it by pushing you away to see if you chase. She asks it by acting like you're guilty so you'll prove you're innocent. She asks it by creating situations where you have to choose her again and again. And some of these tests can look like picking fights over small things, accusing you of motives you don't have, reading betrayal into neutral behavior, moving the goalposts. What was fine yesterday is offensive today. Threatening to leave, hinting at other options, creating jealousy, acting cold, then punishing you for not trying harder, saying hurtful things and watching whether you stay. This isn't healthy. It's not romantic. It's not passion. It's a loyalty exam based on fear. And here's the part men need to tattoo into their minds: this exam has no final score, because the issue isn't your performance. The issue is her inability to believe safety is real. You can pass 10 tests, and the fear will still whisper, but what about tomorrow? So the tests escalate, and then you, the good man, start trying to outlove her fear. You start thinking, if I just show her enough, she'll finally relax. But fear doesn't relax because you perform. It relaxes when it is healed. How good men get trapped. The savior identity. And now let's talk about you. Because men don't stay in these dynamics by accident. A decent man often stays because he sees the pain behind the behavior. He sees the wounded child behind the adult woman. He remembers the early sweetness. He remembers how safe it felt in the beginning. And he tells himself a story. She's not like this deep down. She's just scared. If I'm consistent, she'll settle. I can be the man who changes her whole view of men. That sounds noble. It sounds masculine. It sounds like loyalty. But there's a danger hiding inside that story. It can turn you into a caretaker instead of a partner. You stop choosing the relationship based on what it is, and you start choosing it based on what it could become. And slowly, you start paying with your peace. You tolerate disrespect because you call it hurt. You tolerate manipulation because you call it fear. You tolerate chaos because you call it trauma. And one day, you look around and realize you've become a full-time emotional firefighter, putting out blazes you didn't start. Here's the hard truth. Love is not a substitute for inner work. You cannot heal a wound you didn't create by sacrificing yourself on its altar. You can support someone's growth. You can encourage therapy. You can model stability. You can be consistent, but you cannot do the work inside her nervous system. And if you keep absorbing the consequences of her behavior, you might actually make it easier for her to avoid facing it. Because if every explosion is followed by you, apologizing, chasing, reassuring, and restoring the peace, then the pattern works. Not for love, for survival. It teaches her, I can break things and still be held. That's not healing, that's enabling. Boundaries, the moment that reveals everything. If you want to know whether this relationship has a future, don't listen to promises made during calm moments. Watch what happens when you set a boundary. A boundary is not an ultimatum. It's not aggression. It's not punishment. It's a statement of self-respect. I won't be spoken to like that. I'm stepping away until we can talk calmly. I'm not going to argue when we're both escalated. I need time to think. I'll come back to this conversation later. A healthy partner might not love hearing it, but they can accept it. They can reflect. They can regulate. They can return to the conversation with respect. A partner trapped in a deep abandonment wound may react as if you just threatened their life. Because many wounded systems only know extremes, fusion or rejection, closeness or abandonment, total access or total loss. So your boundary can sound to her nervous system like, I'm leaving. And then the tactics may come out. Guilt, if you loved me, you wouldn't do this. Victim posture, you're hurting me when I need you. Gaslighting, you're too sensitive, you're the problem. Threats, fine, I'll find someone who understands me. Emotional escalation, crying, rage, panic, anything to pull you back into the old dance. This is where a lot of men collapse. Because a decent man doesn't like to see a woman in pain. He doesn't like conflict. He doesn't want to be the bad guy, so he drops the boundary to restore peace. But every time you drop it, you teach her something. My emotions control your standards, and that becomes the relationship. So here's the rule. Your boundary is not real until it costs you something. It costs you comfort. It costs you the quick fix. It costs you the relief of smoothing it over. But it buys you something more valuable. Self-respect and clarity. If she can grow, she will. Eventually adjust to a man with standards. If she cannot grow, she will increasingly punish you for having them. And that answer tells you everything. Intimacy used as anesthesia, not connection. Another common pattern in this dynamic is how intimacy functions. In healthy relationships, physical closeness is an expression of safety, affection, desire, and mutual bonding. It's not a bargaining chip. It's not a tool to avoid hard conversations. But in unstable dynamics, intimacy can become emotional anesthesia. You fight, nothing is resolved. There's still tension. Then suddenly there's a rush of affection, closeness, intensity. We're good now. And for a moment, it feels like the bond is restored. But if intimacy is being used to bypass communication, it doesn't repair the foundation. It only quiets the alarm temporarily. Then 3 days later, the same issue returns because nothing was actually addressed. It was covered in more manipulative versions of this pattern. Intimacy can also become reward and punishment. If you pass, you get warmth. If you fail, warmth is withdrawn. That turns the relationship into conditioning, into control, into emotional economics. And a man who stays in that system can slowly lose his internal compass because he's always chasing the return of connection instead of building consistent trust. This is not about shaming desire. Desire is normal. This is about recognizing when closeness is being used as a bandage instead of a bridge. The long-term cost to a man. Men often downplay how much this drains them because they've been taught to be tough, to carry it, to handle it. But chronic relational stress is not just drama. It rewires you too. It can make you hypervigilant, always monitoring her mood, reactive, snapping faster because you're already on edge, smaller, editing yourself to avoid conflict, numb, shutting down emotionally because expression creates punishment, lonely because you can't talk about it without feeling embarrassed, addicted to relief, confusing peace after conflict with love. And over time, it can poison your future even if you leave because it trains your nervous system to associate relationships with instability. A man who stays too long can exit the relationship and still carry the tension in his body for years. So don't treat this as just a rough patch. Treat it as a serious pattern with a serious price tag. Can it be fixed? Now we reach the question most men are quietly asking. Is there a path where this becomes healthy? The answer is sometimes, but only under specific conditions. And here's the key. Those conditions are not primarily in your control. A stable future requires three things. 1. Awareness without defensiveness. She has to recognize the pattern as her pattern, not "you made me do this." Not all men are the problem. Not "I'm just passionate." Real awareness sounds like my reactions are extreme. I struggle with trust. I sabotage closeness. I push you away when I'm scared. That level of honesty is rare, but it's the doorway. Without it, nothing changes. Because if she believes you're the cause, she will never do the work. 2. Action, not promises. Insight alone doesn't rewire trauma. Trauma lives in the body, in automatic reactions, in learned defenses. Healing requires consistent effort, often with professional support. That can mean therapy, attachment work, trauma-informed counseling, learning emotional regulation skills, practicing communication without manipulation, building a sense of identity that doesn't depend on control. If she says, "I'll try," but refuses help, refuses accountability, and repeats the cycle, then try is just a word. You cannot build a stable home on words alone. 3. The ability to tolerate discomfort. Healing feels uncomfortable because it means giving up familiar coping strategies. For someone used to chaos, calm can feel unbearable at first. For someone used to testing, Trusting feels like free falling. For someone used to control, boundaries feel like danger. So growth requires the willingness to sit in discomfort without destroying the relationship to relieve it. If she can do that over time, you can build something real. If she cannot, then the relationship will keep demanding that you bleed to keep it alive. Your role: steady, not self-sacrificing. If you're dealing with this, your job is not to become colder, not to become cruel, not to dominate. Your job is to be a man with a spine and a heart. That means stay calm, but don't appease. Be consistent, but don't chase. Listen, but don't accept disrespect. Support growth, but don't become the therapist. Love, but don't abandon yourself. Stop participating in cycles that reward chaos. When she runs, don't sprint after her to beg for peace. When she escalates, don't match the escalation. When she accuses, don't enter a courtroom and spend hours defending your character. Instead, you bring the interaction back to reality. I'm willing to talk when we're respectful. I won't be insulted. I'm not doing threats. I'm not arguing about things I didn't do. Then you follow through. Not to punish her, to protect the relationship from becoming a war zone. If she's capable of growth, your firmness becomes a stable frame, a structure she can eventually relax into. If she's not capable of growth, your firmness becomes a mirror she can't tolerate, and she will either intensify the manipulation or walk away. And if she walks away because you stop being controllable, that is not your failure. That is your rescue. The final truth: potential is not a relationship. A lot of men stay because they're loyal to an image. The version of her from the beginning. The version of her in good moments. The version of her that appears after she calms down and says the right things. But a man has to learn this. You don't date potential. You date patterns. You don't build a future on the best day of the month. You build it on what repeats. Ask yourself the questions men avoid because the answers force decisions. When you're in this relationship, do you feel stronger or smaller? Do you feel respected or managed? Do you feel peace or constant evaluation? Do you feel safe to be yourself? Or do you feel like you're always one wrong move away from punishment? Because love that requires you to abandon your dignity is not love that builds a life. And no matter how much you care, you are not obligated to sacrifice your mental health to pay for someone else's unresolved past. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is step out of the role you were assigned, to stop being the stand-in for her father, to stop being the target for her fear, to stop being the container for her chaos. Walking away isn't always a lack of love. Sometimes it's an act of self-respect. Sometimes it's the only way you stop the cycle. And sometimes it's the only chance she has to face her own pattern without outsourcing the consequences to you. What to do tonight? When things go quiet, when the house feels tense, when you're replaying the latest argument, when you're wondering how you got here, don't just ask, how do I fix this? Ask a better question. What is this costing me? Then ask the question that defines a man's future. If nothing changes, can I live like this for 5 years? Because your life is not a rehearsal. You are the main character of your story, not a supporting actor in someone else's drama. If this hit home, don't ignore it. Don't numb it. Don't rationalize it away. Clarity is a form of protection. Thank you for being here. Stay sharp. Stay grounded. And above all, protect your mind, your standards, and your purpose.